Maya, a black woman in her 40s, had worked for several years as a waitress in an upscale city restaurant. Her dignity and professionalism made her a respected employee among her colleagues, though she remained invisible to the patrons. Her warm smile and quiet efficiency were invaluable to the team, even if the customers rarely took the time to truly see her. That evening, the restaurant buzzed with energy, filled with elegant and lively diners. The refined dishes and hushed conversations created a sophisticated ambience. Moving gracefully between the tables, Maya delivered food and drinks with expert precision. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until Mrs. Laurent, an influential and notoriously difficult client, suddenly rose from her table. Mrs. Laurent was furious, her face twisted with indignation. She desperately scanned the room, her eyes darting about in visible agitation. Within minutes, she accused Maya of stealing her gold watch, a valuable piece that had mysteriously vanished. Mrs. Laurent's anger was unmistakable, and her loud accusations quickly drew the attention of the entire restaurant. The maitre d', a man in his 50s, found himself caught between the demands of an important client and the delicate situation at hand. Pressured by Mrs. Laurent's social standing, he chose to side with her without even hearing Maya's explanation. He ordered Maya to report immediately to the restaurant office for a private discussion, reprimanding the rest of the staff to remain discreet. The tension escalated in the office, where Maya faced the stern maitre d' and his accusatory gaze. Despite her clear explanations and insistence on her innocence, no one seemed willing to believe her. The lack of concrete evidence against her did not deter the maitre d', who, under pressure, deemed her guilty. Wrongfully accused, Maya was arrested on the spot and taken into custody to await trial. The shock of her arrest and the public humiliation left deep scars. The ride to the police station was silent and heavy as Maya grappled with the injustice that had befallen her. The 30 days Maya spent in detention were grueling. The prison was a dark and oppressive place, where every gaze seemed filled with contempt. Other inmates, unsympathetic, greeted her with harsh remarks and dismissive gestures. Though resigned to her situation, Maya held her head high, striving to maintain her dignity. Rumors about her alleged guilt spread like wildfire, fueled by the absence of clear evidence and the indifference of the authorities. Her days followed a monotonous rhythm, punctuated by visits from her family, who fought tirelessly to prove her innocence, and long hours of isolation in her cell. Her family's relentless efforts to gather evidence and rally support met with a cold and unyielding judicial system. Witnesses were uncooperative, and evidence was scarce, making the fight for justice even more challenging. Family visits provided comfort, but also served as a painful reminder of the harsh reality she faced. Her husband, with whom she shared a deep bond, and her children did everything they could to offer her solace and hope. They spent countless hours seeking potential witnesses, compiling evidence, and striving to draw media attention to her case. Despite their dedication, the road was fraught with obstacles, and every attempt to make progress ended in frustration. As the days dragged on, Maya felt the toll of her ordeal on her mental and physical health. The daily humiliation, accusatory stares, and glaring injustice she endured became increasingly difficult to bear. Yet, she clung to hope for a favorable outcome, drawing strength from the support she received and the small advancements her family managed to achieve. As the trial date approached, a faint glimmer of hope began to emerge. The final weeks of her detention were marked by nervous anticipation. Maya's lawyers, overwhelmed by the case's complexity, worked tirelessly to prepare a compelling defense. The community's support and her family's tireless efforts were palpable, but the judicial system remained resistant to uncovering the truth. The trial day finally arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with tension. Maya, clad in her prison uniform, stood tall, her face bearing the marks of exhaustion and resolve. The plaintiff's lawyers, though their arguments were biased, spared no effort in bolstering the case against her. Mrs. Laurent, with an air of arrogance and disdain, hurled racist insinuations and disparaging remarks, seeking to discredit Maya through prejudice. "You think you can get away with this because you work here? "You're at the bottom of the ladder," Mrs. Laurent sneered, her gaze dripping with contempt. Maya's lawyers fought to reveal the truth. They highlighted the lack of solid evidence against her and pointed out the contradictions in Mrs. Laurent's testimony. Their arguments were robust, yet they faced a courtroom already skewed by social pressures and prejudice. The trial began with the plaintiff's arguments. Mrs. Laurent, dressed in an elegant suit, stood confidently as her lawyers presented their case with theatrical fervor. They emphasized her credibility as a respected client while painting Maya as the ideal scapegoat, all without presenting concrete proof. When it was Maya's lawyer's turn to speak, he rose with determination. He began by dissecting the flaws in Mrs. Laurent's story, exposing its inconsistencies and lack of tangible evidence. He called on witnesses who had been overlooked, including Maya's colleagues, who attested to her impeccable conduct and worked to demonstrate the absence of any motive for her to commit such an act. Despite these efforts, the atmosphere remained heavy, and the outcome of the trial seemed uncertain. The tribunal's members, influenced by Mrs. Laurent's social status and racial prejudices, often appeared more concerned with appearances than with facts. The most poignant moment of the trial came when Maya was given the opportunity to speak. Despite her ordeal, she expressed her innocence and the humiliation she had endured with strength and dignity. Her words, filled with sincerity and pain, touched some members of the audience, who began to see beyond the prejudice and accusations. "I have never stolen anything. My only crime is being in the wrong place at the wrong time and being misjudged based on unfair prejudices," Maya declared with emotion. The trial continued in an atmosphere of distrust and tension, with new challenges arising daily for Maya's defense team. Yet, as testimonies unfolded and evidence was scrutinized, cracks began to form in the prosecution's narrative. Just as the situation seemed hopeless for Maya, an unexpected event dramatically altered the course of the trial. While the defense attorneys worked to expose the flaws in Mrs. Laurent's testimony, the courtroom door suddenly swung open. A police detective, previously engaged in a separate investigation, entered, holding a USB drive. His serious and determined expression signaled that what he brought was of critical importance. The judge interrupted the proceedings to allow the detective to address the court. In a grave tone, he explained that during his investigation into a theft at another restaurant in the city, he had come across surveillance footage from the night of the incident. These videos, from both interior and exterior cameras at the restaurant where Maya worked, would completely change the course of the trial. "I have here a video that proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Maya was never near Mrs. Laurent's table when the watch disappeared," the detective announced, holding up the USB drive. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. All eyes turned to the judge, who, after brief deliberation, allowed the video to be shown. The atmosphere was electric as the bailiff quickly set up a screen for the pivotal evidence. When the video began to play, the truth was laid bare. It showed Maya diligently serving customers in another section of the restaurant, far from Mrs. Laurent's table, at the exact time the watch allegedly went missing. Not only did the footage exonerate Maya, but it also revealed a shocking detail. Mrs. Laurent, in a distracted moment, was seen removing her own watch and placing it in her bag before accusing Maya of theft. The effect was immediate. Mrs. Laurent, previously arrogant and confident, turned pale as the evidence unfolded before everyone. Her lawyers, visibly flustered, attempted to downplay the revelation, but the damage was done. The detective went on to reveal that Mrs. Laurent had been implicated in several similar incidents in the past, where she had falsely accused employees of theft to gain compensation or personal advantages. Shock reverberated throughout the courtroom. The tribunal, initially hesitant to question Mrs. Laurent's version of events, began to realize the monumental injustice inflicted upon Maya. The prosecution's once solid case crumbled under the weight of this undeniable evidence. Maya, seated in the defendant's box, remained still, tears of emotion filling her eyes. After weeks of humiliation, scorn, and suffering, the truth had finally come to light. Her family, present in the courtroom, looked at her with pride and relief. The judge called for a temporary recess to review the new evidence. A few hours later, After examining the video and hearing the detective's explanations, there was no longer any doubt. Maya was innocent. The verdict was finally delivered. Maya was acquitted of all charges. The court acknowledged that the accusations were baseless and that Mrs. Lauron had manipulated the situation for her own benefit. Mrs. Lauron was immediately taken into custody for false accusations and fraud. When Maya stepped out of the courtroom, she was greeted by a crowd of supporters, including community members and colleagues who had attended the trial. The media, which had shown little interest in the case before, began to report the story from a new perspective, highlighting the injustices and prejudices that had led to this ordeal. Despite the trauma she had endured, Maya left the trial with her head held high. Though marked by the emotional and physical scars of her 30 days in prison, she had proven that truth ultimately prevails, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Maya's story serves as a timeless lesson, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, the light of truth can break through.